First You Think is a not-for-profit ministry of the First Unitarian Church of Des Moines. Support us at ucdsm.org today.
Last week, I mistakenly said the presidential inauguration was to be 1 week after Martin Luther King Day. Sorry about that brain fart. The inauguration, in fact, has happened on Martin Luther King Day, and we are now into this president's new term. And from what we've seen so far, it doesn't look great. What is ours to do is keep living by our values, keep living into the mission we share, to love radically, to grow ethically and spiritually, to serve justly. Every act of caring about someone or something other than yourself and your narrowly conceived self-interests is an act of resistance. Every time you acknowledge that you don't know something but are interested in learning more about it, even if the truth is uncomfortable, it's an act of resistance. Every time you accept responsibility when something goes wrong, that's an act of resistance. Every time you give credit to others when something goes right, that's an act of resistance. Every time you thoughtfully examine an issue rather than grasping at quick fixes or dismissals, that too is an act of resistance. We sang today in our opening hymn, "Come, Spirit, come, our hearts control, our spirits long to be made whole. Let inward love guide every deed. By this we worship and are freed." And our spirits do long to be made whole. Even when we understand that we are whole, the world leaves us often feeling that we aren't. We don't feel connected to our neighbors. The fragmentation in the nation's public political sphere produces a fragmentation in our psyches. We need to feel part of something we're all in together. There are a number of conditions that have contributed to our current predicament. Social media enables instantaneous spread of false information, certainly a factor. Today, though, I want to look at meritocracy. The rise of meritocracy, which has been going on for decades, by its nature and design, left many behind. Maybe we shouldn't have been surprised at the intensity of resentment about that which erupted in the 2016 election, simmered through the 2020 election, and grew stronger yet for the 2024 election. Meritocracy is based on the idea that people get positions of power and authority and wealth by deserving to have those positions. So meritocracy depends on some implicit or explicit desert theory. Desert theory is not a theory about why people like to have something sugary at the end of a meal, nor is desert theory about why people desert or abandon other people or areas. It's spelled like desert, but desert theory is also not about why some regions become dry and arid. Desert theory tries to offer an account of what constitutes deservingness. It is our mission to grow ethically and spiritually, and the role of your conception of desert is in your ways of thinking it's a part of your ethical reasoning. So let's think about that conception and see if we can find some avenues for growing ethically, because growing is an act of resistance. We very commonly talk and think in terms of who deserves what. We say that a hardworking student who produces work of high quality deserves a high grade. That a vicious criminal deserves a harsh penalty. That someone who has suffered a series of misfortunes deserves some good luck for a change. An athlete might deserve a prize in virtue of having excelled in a competition. A researcher might deserve our gratitude for having perfected a vaccine against a disease. Someone who acts without any regard for the welfare of others may deserve our contempt. The victim of an industrial accident may deserve compensation from her negligent employer. An employee who deserves a promotion in virtue of evident talent, hard work, and years of valuable service. Deservingness, is a kind of fiction. It's a social imaginary, but that doesn't mean it doesn't have real potency to make a big difference in our lives. After all, money is fiction too. It's a social imaginary, and it certainly makes a big difference. It used to be a shiny yellowish metal that was too soft to be useful, but an implicit agreement arose to regard it as valuable, and so it was. Then it was just slips of paper, and now it's even more imaginary than that. But since we have agreed to share this imagination, we've developed clear procedures for when you have it and exactly how much. The electrons inside of bank computers keep track of each person's amount. Desert is this kind of fiction. How deserving you are and of what is not nearly as precisely determined as how much money you have, and yet notions of desert do shape our lives and the way we treat each other. Sometimes we say a person deserves something if they are entitled to it. We might say a customer deserves a refund from a merchant if the customer purchased a product that was sold with a guarantee and then the product turned out to be defective. But being entitled to something is one way to deserve it, but it's not the only way. Entitled means that there are rules in place to say what you are to get, but sometimes our sense of what is deserved doesn't match up with what the rules say. Consider the case of a wealthy old man dies leaving behind 2 grandsons, one of whom is vicious, never treated his grandfather with respect, and one was virtuous and always respectful and caring. We might feel that the virtuous grandson deserved to inherit more of the fortune, but the vicious one would nevertheless be entitled to the greater share if that was what the will stipulated. So you can be entitled even if you don't deserve, and you can sometimes deserve without being entitled. Some things we say everyone deserves. Everyone deserves fairness, justice, human rights. And then there are other cases where only one or a few people will get the job or the promotion or the win, and we might talk about which person deserves it or deserves it most. I think a lot of our desert theory is mostly absorbed from the discourse around us. We hear people talk about what so-and-so deserves, and over time we internalize ways of applying the sentiment. But sometimes we do reason with each other about deservingness. It's not always just an intuition. It can be reasoned about. This is easiest to see when it comes to what we think everyone deserves just in virtue of being human. So we come to the argument for meritocracy. Positions of greatest power and prestige should be open to everyone on the basis of merit. The U.S. never had an official aristocracy, but it certainly had an unofficial one. The old money families got into the best schools and went on to the best paying and most powerful positions in society. The argument for meritocracy was an argument that people of merit deserved those positions, not people of breeding. So meritocracy seems like a great step forward for justice and fairness. Ivy League institutions, from their founding up until about 1960, admitted only white Christian men, and within that group selected students for breeding. These were schools for the sons of well-established families. Then, in the middle of the 20th century, Harvard President James Bryant Conant, and slightly later, Yale President Kingman Brewster, chose to abandon their historic role as finishing schools for America's aristocracy. As Daniel Markovits describes it, alumni had long believed that their sons had a birthright to follow them to Yale. Now prospective students would gain admission based on achievement rather than breeding. Meritocracy, for a time, replaced complacent insiders with talented and hardworking outsiders. Surely that was a very positive move. People with merit deserve to get admitted. People of aristocratic breeding have no special deservingness. By 1970, a fierce merit-based competition had completely replaced the old cordial alliance between the universities and old money established families. Today, however, it's past time to consider our judgments of deservingness based on merit. We tend to think that merit is the product of two factors, talent and effort. But it's actually a product of three factors. We often overlook the importance of the third factor, quality training. Teachers, coaches, good equipment, and other resources. Excellence at basketball or ballet, at chess or computer programming, at piano or painting or composing poetry or any academic subject is not just a matter of native ability combined with dedication and determination. We'll look further into the role of the quality of training after an interlude with a piece of music that piano musics all over the world train on. You will not make as much progress as you will if you also have a skilled and attentive coach guiding your practice. Further, when it comes to competitive college or professional sports programs, it takes more than a good coach. It takes platoons of coaches and lots of expensive equipment. When I was a graduate student at the University of Virginia in the late 1980s, it seemed all wrong to me that the university was then in the midst of spending $50 million to build a shiny new athletic training facility. In fact, though, a school cannot be competitive at Division I football without such resources. Resources make a difference. Because quality training is so crucial, it means that a big part of what admission departments regard as merit can be bought. So what started out as a move to open up elite institutions to deserving students from the middle and lower classes now entrenches the advantages of wealth. Expensive private schools pay off. A typical public high school spends $15,000 per child per year. Some poorer high schools spend $8,000 to $10,000 per child per year. But the top 20 private schools, as measured by Forbes, average $75,000 per child per year. And this buys results. It buys training, it buys smaller class size, more teacher attention, it buys more talented teachers, it buys careful education programs. The result is that while the average middle-class kid's SAT is 125 points higher than the average score of kids in poverty, the average score of kids of those whose parents earn more than $200,000 a year is 250 points greater than the average middle-class kid. Yes, the gap between rich and middle class is twice the size of the gap between middle class and poor. What does your desert theory say about whether the wealthier kids deserve those higher scores and the benefits they get as a result of those scores? Discounting the few who outright cheated, we can say, yes, they had talent and they worked hard. On the other hand, they also had a lot of quality training that wasn't available to middle and lower class kids. The result is that at Ivy League and what are called Ivy League Plus schools, the plus includes schools like Stanford, MIT, University of Chicago, Duke, Northwestern, Johns Hopkins, Caltech, the proportion of students who come from the top 1% of household incomes is greater than the proportion that come from the entire bottom 50% of household incomes. This comes as the upshot of meritocratic admission policies that were originally supposed to reverse this very disparity. Further, what students get when they arrive on campus is more quality training, much greater resources being spent on them. And the students and their families don't even have to pay for most of what they get. There is an enormous public subsidy that results from universities being taxed as charities, with alumni donations being tax deductible and endowments able to grow without being taxed. Princeton's tax exemption amounts to a public subsidy of $100,000 per student per year. Rutgers' public subsidy is less than $13,000 per student per year. Nearby Essex Community College has a public subsidy of only about $2,500 per student per year. We are pouring vast public resources into further advantaging the already advantaged. What does your desert theory say about that? And just as the resources expended at elite high schools matter for preparing the students to get into and succeed at elite universities, the resources expended at elite universities matter for preparing students to get into and succeed at the highest paid jobs. Many of the top law firms and financial institutions will only recruit at a few elite universities, and they will rarely hire graduates of an average state school. So that's one thing for us to think about, that our intuitions about the deservingness of merit often overlook the vastly unequal distribution of quality training. Now let's look at another factor. Our desert theory tends to say that working hard increases deservingness. But we don't always recognize that there is such a thing as working too hard. After all, it's not that the children of the elites aren't working hard for what they get. In fact, overall, they're probably working too hard. The pressure on the elite kids to do well is inordinate. As Daniel Markovits writes, elite middle and high schools now commonly require 3 to 5 hours of homework at night. Epidemiologists at the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention have warned of schoolwork-induced sleep deprivation. Wealthy students show higher rates of drug and alcohol abuse than poor students do. They also suffer from depression and anxiety at rates as much as triple those of their age peers throughout the country. A recent study of Silicon Valley High School found that 54% of students displayed moderate to severe symptoms of depression, and 80% displayed moderate to severe symptoms of anxiety. So what does your desert theory say about whether someone deserves what they're working for if what they're working for is a sleep-deprived, depressed, anxious, unhappy life? And it's only getting worse. As the competition is getting more and more intense, exclusive institutions are getting more and more exclusive. As recently as 1995, University of Chicago admitted 71% of its applicants. By 2019, it was admitting less than 6%. It's getting worse. And then, notes Markovits, the contest intensifies when meritocrats enter the workplace, where elite opportunity is exceeded only by the competitive effort required to grasp it. A person whose wealth and status depend on her human capital simply cannot afford to consult her own interests or passions in choosing her job. Instead, she must approach work as an opportunity to extract value from her human capital, especially if she wants an income sufficient to buy her children the type of schooling that secured her own eliteness. She must devote herself to a narrowly restricted class of high-paying jobs concentrated in finance, management, law, and medicine. Whereas aristocrats once considered themselves a leisure class, meritocrats work with unprecedented intensity. It used to be the poor that had to work long hours, and the rich were the leisure class. Not that that was a good system, but it's striking that now it's more often the rich who are working 70, 80 hours a week. And they are working at jobs, many times, that they aren't particularly happy at. One might be tempted to say that this is getting what they deserve in the sense that it's the punishment they deserve. Markovits goes on to say, elite workers find it harder and harder to pursue genuine passions or gain meaning through their work. Meritocracy traps entire generations inside demeaning fears and inauthentic ambitions, always hungry, but never finding or even knowing the right food. Moreover, doesn't your desert theory suggest that there should be some connection between the income that a given job deserves and its actual contribution to society? And yet that connection has been getting weaker and weaker. Don't both the losers and the winners of the meritocratic rat race deserve better than they are getting? The basic conceit of meritocracy is that those who succeed deserve to. So those in less prestigious positions in society internalize the message that it's their own fault, that they are less than. They grow resentful of the elite, and yes, start voting for populist demagogues who articulate resentment against elites. As Markovits notes, demagogues and charlatans monopolize and exploit meritocracy's discontents. Meritocratic inequality, therefore, induces not only deep discontent, but also widespread pessimism, verging on despair. So, we think people deserve what they merit, but meritocracy has these two problems. First, the fairness problem. There's unequal access to quality training, and this inequality is so great that the meritocracy today is really aristocracy by another name. Second, even if it were all perfectly fair and equitable, there's more to life than merit. Sure, merit matters in a lot of ways, but merit has become tyrannical. We shouldn't have to work that hard, shouldn't have to work 60 hours a week to deserve a concern and respect of our compatriots. Don't we all deserve better? Or rather, can we give ourselves a break from the very idea of desert, of merit, of the constant pressure to deserve, to earn everything? We could build a society with dramatically expanded access to quality training. We could build a society where we all have a chance to contribute meaningfully to the overall social good, and where a person's income bears some relationship to their real contribution to society. But even more importantly, we could build a society that affords everyone enough rest and leisure for physical and psychological health. May all of that be so.